It wasn't sleek, it wasn't fast, and it sure wasn't subtle. But for a brief, terrifying moment in World War II, the KV-2 was one of the most feared machines on the Eastern Front. With its towering, oversized turret and massive gun, it looked more like something from a nightmare than a battlefield. And yet, despite its unforgettable appearance, the KV-2's story has lived mostly in the shadows, dismissed as a failure, overlooked as a curiosity. Today, we're changing that. Why did this bizarre steel monster even exist? How did it earn its short-lived reputation for terror? And what was it like to be one of the poor souls trapped inside that metal giant? The KV-2 was many things. A blunt instrument, a mechanical disaster, a symbol of Soviet brute force thinking. But boring wasn't one of them. The KV-2 wasn't born in a design studio with time and care. It was born in the cold, brutal failure of the 1939 Winter War between the Soviet Union and Finland. As Soviet tanks rolled into the Finnish Mannerheim line, they ran face-first into a hard truth. Their guns couldn't breach fortified bunkers. The standard KV-1 tank was well armored for the time, but its 76mm gun simply couldn't deal with hardened defenses. The Red Army didn't need a better tank. They needed a bunker buster that could keep up with advancing troops. Instead of developing a purpose-built, self-propelled gun, Soviet engineers, likely under pressure, deadlines, and a heavy dose of vodka, did something very Soviet. They took the KV-1 chassis and bolted a massive 152mm howitzer into an equally massive turret. The KV-2 was born not out of innovation but out of desperation and brute improvisation. The design process was alarmingly fast, just 2 weeks from concept to prototype. The first version was called the KV Bolshaya Bashnya, or KV Big Turret. It looked absurd, top-heavy, and absolutely monstrous. But it worked, barely. Stalin demanded results, and the engineers delivered. 4 early KV-1s were retrofitted with the new turrets and rushed into combat in Finland. Testing was minimal. Flaws were ignored. The gun fired, and that was all that mattered. When your country is at war and your dictator is known for making problems disappear, you don't question the assignment. You just build the biggest turret in history and hope it doesn't fall off. On the battlefield, the KV-2 made an impression. In combat trials in Finland, it absorbed fire like a walking fortress. In one case, a KV-2 reportedly took 22 direct hits and kept fighting. Finnish anti-tank gunners, out of desperation and ammo, simply stopped shooting. There was no point. Crews nicknamed it the Dreadnought, and for a brief period it lived up to the name. Its armor, between 75 and 110 millimeters thick, was nearly untouchable by enemy weapons. And its 152mm howitzer could level bunkers or obliterate infantry positions with a single shot. It wasn't agile, it wasn't subtle, but in that specific role it worked. The problem was, everything beneath that armor was cracking. The KV-1 chassis already weighed 45 tons and had a reputation for breakdowns. The KV-2 pushed that to over 53 tons, and nothing, not the engine, not the suspension, not the transmission, was upgraded to handle it. The result was a mechanical disaster. The engine strained, the gearbox overheated, and the turret ring constantly threatened to give out under the weight of the gun. Off-road, its top speed was barely 12 kilometers per hour, assuming it didn't break down before it got there. It was a beast, but one with weak joints and bad knees. And then there was the turret, the worst part of all. Massive, tall, and incredibly heavy, it rotated slowly even on level ground. The electric traverse could complete a full turn in about 40 seconds, but only in perfect conditions. On uneven terrain, it often slowed to a crawl or failed entirely. Crews then had to switch to manual rotation, which could take up to 3 minutes to turn 360 degrees, assuming the turret didn't jam entirely, And because the recoil of the gun was so violent, the tank had to come to a complete stop before firing. On slopes, the turret sometimes turned on its own. Friendly infantry learned to keep their distance. It was less a precision weapon and more a steel avalanche waiting for gravity to win. Inside the turret, the situation wasn't much better. The crew space was hot, loud, and claustrophobic. 2 loaders were required to handle the massive shells, which weighed around 40 kilograms each and had to be loaded in 2 separate pieces. Projectile first, then the propellant. Ammunition was stored in the hull below the turret, meaning the crew had to climb down a ladder, haul the round up, ram it into the breech, and fire, then do it all again. Theoretically, it could fire 2 rounds per minute. In reality, it was slower, especially when exhaustion set in. Soviet tankers said the real battle wasn't against the enemy, it was against the tank itself. Still, for a few brief months in 1941, the KV-2 was terrifying. German tanks couldn't touch it. Light anti-tank weapons bounced off harmlessly. Even the 50mm guns struggled. The only thing that reliably worked was the famous 88mm flak cannon, which had to be wheeled into position like a field gun. Until that happened, a KV-2 could halt an entire column. German units often tried to bypass or immobilize it, then finish it off with artillery or dive bombers. It was a beast, if it showed up at the right place and didn't break down first. But then came Operation Barbarossa, and the cracks in the KV-2 became impossible to ignore. The Soviet military wasn't prepared for Germany's speed, coordination, or overwhelming firepower. KV-2s were deployed in desperation, used as frontline tanks instead of their intended role. They were slow, sluggish, and impossible to hide. Some were sent into battle without ammunition. Crews were barely trained, sometimes with as little as 10 hours of instruction. Most KV-2s were abandoned, not destroyed. Out of fuel, broken down, or simply left behind as the front collapsed. And yet, one KV-2 carved itself into legend. On June 23, 1941, near the town of Raseiniai in Lithuania, a lone KV-2 parked itself on a key supply road. Locals assumed it was abandoned. It just sat there, silent. But when a German convoy rolled through the next morning, the turret began to move. A shell roared out and 12 trucks exploded. Chaos followed. German units scrambled to respond. Anti-tank guns opened fire, to no effect. Even the 88mm was brought forward only to be destroyed by a single well-timed shot from the KV. All day, that one tank fought off attack after attack, from tanks, infantry, and sappers. By nightfall, the road was littered with burning wreckage. Finally, after repeated assaults, German soldiers managed to sneak up behind the tank and throw grenades into the vision ports. The crew was killed. When the Germans opened the hatch, they found 6 dead Soviet soldiers and a machine that had fought an entire division nearly to a standstill. Colonel Raus, commanding the German forces, was so impressed by their bravery that he ordered them buried with full military honors. Their names were never recorded, but their stand became a symbol of everything the KV-2 could be. In the right hands at the right time. By late 1941, the KV-2's story was over. Production was shut down as Soviet factories relocated eastward. Of the 204 KV-2s built, most were lost in the first year of the war. The design was abandoned, too flawed, too complex, too outdated. But the lessons it left behind weren't forgotten. Its gun, that 152mm beast, would return in vehicles like the Su-152 and ISU-152, mounted in fixed superstructures that made more sense, with better reliability and more practical design. Only one KV-2 survives today. It sits in a museum, massive, boxy, and unmistakable. The KV-2 was never a great tank, but it was unforgettable. It was terrifying when it worked, tragic when it failed, and legendary in the moments in between. Built in panic, armed like a siege gun, and deployed in chaos, it was a tank that didn't belong in the war it was sent into. And that's exactly what made it iconic.